1943. A secret workshop somewhere in rural England. A British SOE officer unwraps a package that has just arrived from America. Inside is something that looks like it belongs in a museum, not a war. A crossbow. But this is no antique. This device, called the Little Joe, weighs just over 2 pounds, fires aluminium bolts at 170 feet per second, and makes less noise than a closing door. The Americans who built it believe it could be the perfect assassination weapon. The British officer testing it is not so sure. What happened next would determine whether medieval technology had any place in modern warfare. The answer was no. But the reasons why reveal something fascinating about the science of silent killing and why British engineers ultimately solved the problem in a completely different way. The Royal Armouries in Leeds holds a surviving Little Joe prototype, and OSS testing reports preserved in specialist literature tell the rest of the story. This is the story of why Allied intelligence tried to bring back the crossbow, and why the weapon that actually terrified German guards across occupied Europe looks nothing like what you might expect. The problem facing both British and American intelligence services in 1942 was deceptively simple. How do you kill a man without anyone hearing it? Resistance networks across occupied Europe needed to eliminate German sentries, silence collaborators, and remove obstacles to sabotage operations. Every method available had drawbacks. Knives required getting within arm's length. The Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, that iconic commando dagger, was devastatingly effective in trained hands, but using it meant closing to touching distance with a German soldier, often one who was armed, alert, and trained to fight. Even the most skilled operative faced significant risk at such close quarters. Garrots demanded approaching from behind without detection. A wire loop around the throat could kill silently, but only if the target remained completely unaware until the moment of attack. One glance over the shoulder, one suspicious noise, and the advantage disappeared. Pistols, even suppressed ones, still made noise. The technology of 1942 could reduce a gunshot's sound but not eliminate it. A single muffled crack in a quiet French village at 2 a.m. would bring German patrols running. Worse, suppressor technology degraded rapidly. After a handful of shots, the noise reduction dropped significantly. The perfect assassination weapon would combine the silence of a blade with the range of a firearm. It would kill instantly, leave no sound, and allow the operative to remain at a safe distance from the target. The solution, some American engineers believed, lay in the distant past. Crossbows had been killing men silently for centuries. Medieval assassins had used them precisely because they made almost no sound. The technology was proven. It simply needed updating for modern warfare. In October 1942, the American Office of Strategic Services formally requested their National Defense Research Committee to develop a silent, concealable weapon for covert operations. The design goals were ambitious, perhaps unrealistically so. Engineers were asked to achieve something approaching 1,000 feet per second muzzle velocity, 30-second reloading time, complete silence, easy concealment, a weapon that could kill a German sentry from 30 yards without alerting anyone nearby. The 1,000 feet per second figure was quickly recognized as unachievable for a concealable mechanical weapon, but it showed how seriously the requirement was taken. The man overseeing this program was Stanley P. Lovell, a Boston chemist serving as the OSS Research and Development Director. His colleagues called him Professor Moriarty, after the criminal mastermind in the Sherlock Holmes stories. The nickname was apt. Lovell had travelled to Britain specifically to learn what he called dirty tricks from SOE before launching American programs. He returned convinced that unconventional weapons would play a crucial role in the shadow war against the Axis powers. The engineers assigned to the crossbow project were part of a secretive group called the Sandeman Club, officially known as Division 19. They quickly realised that traditional crossbow designs could never meet these requirements. Medieval crossbows were large, heavy, and required considerable strength to cock. A knight's arbalest might have punched through armour at impressive distances, but no secret agent could carry one concealed through occupied territory. They needed something entirely new. The team experimented with various propulsion systems before settling on an unexpected solution. Rather than traditional bow limbs made from wood, steel, or fiberglass, they would use rubber bands. Dozens of them, arranged in parallel, storing tremendous elastic energy in a compact package. The result would be mechanically simple, easy to maintain in the field, and nearly silent in operation. By February 1943, they had created the Little Joe penetrometer. The name came from dice terminology, a reference to the weapon's compact size. But there was nothing playful about its purpose. This was a killing device, designed to put a steel-tipped bolt through a human body at 30 yards. The Little Joe looked unlike any crossbow in history. Its frame was heat-treated cast aluminium, shaped like a pistol grip with a rectangular housing on top. Instead of traditional bow limbs made from wood or steel, it used 50 rubber bands with a graphite-coated linen contact point. Technically, it was more slingshot than crossbow, but the principle remained the same: store mechanical energy silently, release it to propel a projectile into a target. The specifications were impressive for such a compact device. Total weight was 2.25 pounds, length was 13 inches, height was 8 inches. It could fire 4 rounds per minute in trained hands. According to OSS testing reports, skilled operators achieved 6-inch groupings at 20 yards, and the bolts themselves weighed 8 ounces each, with broad-headed metal tips, wooden shafts, and bird feather fletching. Test records indicate that at 30 yards a bolt could pass completely through a uniformed human body. Most importantly, tests recorded the Little Joe at roughly 72 decibels when fired. For comparison, a normal conversation registers around 60 decibels. The Little Joe was notably quieter than most suppressed firearms of the era, and remarkably quiet for any weapon. The Welrod, by comparison, was engineered to operate in the low 70s when its suppressors were fresh. The crossbow was genuinely approaching the threshold of ambient noise. The Americans were pleased enough with the prototype that they immediately began work on a larger version. The Big Joe 5 was a shoulder-fired weapon weighing 10 pounds with a triangular rigid frame and a collapsible heavy steel wire stock that doubled as a cocking lever. Its power came from 300 rubber rings, 150 per side, creating an extraordinary 550-pound draw weight. No human could cock it by hand. Instead, operators used a windlass mechanism, cranking the bands into position before each shot. The Big Joe fired 14-inch aluminium darts out to 80 yards with reasonable accuracy. It could also launch specialized incendiary flare bolts to 200 yards. Whether Little Joe was a close-range assassination tool, the Big Joe was meant for eliminating sentries at extended distances or setting fires in enemy installations without the telltale sound of a gunshot. A third model, designated the William Tell, represented an intermediate design. Slimmer than the Big Joe 5, it used a cable winch cocking system instead of a ratchet bar. Testing in summer 1945 found it the quietest of all 3 variants at just 66 decibels. Unfortunately, the war ended before the William Tell could be properly evaluated, and no examples are known to survive today. Production numbers tell you something important about how seriously these weapons were taken. Only a few dozen prototypes were made in total across all variants. These were never mass production items. These were experimental devices being evaluated for potential deployment, and according to specialist technical literature, the numbers remained tiny throughout the program. In 1943, American intelligence shared the Little Joe with their British counterparts. At least one complete weapon with bolts was transferred to SOE for evaluation. This is where the popular myth of British crossbow assassins begins, and where the historical record becomes frustratingly sparse. SOE, the Special Operations Executive, had been tasked by Winston Churchill to set Europe ablaze through sabotage and subversion. Created in July 1940, the organisation operated outside normal military channels, answering directly to the Minister of Economic Warfare. Its agents parachuted into occupied territory, organised resistance networks, blew up railway lines, and assassinated German officials. They needed weapons that conventional military forces would never consider. SOE operated secret workshops across Britain, most notably Station 9 at a country house called the Fryth in Welwyn Garden City. Here, engineers developed an astonishing array of unconventional weapons, explosive rats designed to be shoveled into German boiler rooms, lumps of coal packed with plastic explosive for sabotaging locomotive tenders, time delay detonators disguised as everyday objects, itching powder that could incapacitate German troops for days, tyre busters scattered across roads to cripple convoy vehicles. If any organisation would find a use for a silent crossbow, it was SOE. Their entire purpose was unconventional warfare. Their engineers had already proved they could weaponise anything from rodents to coal. A modernised crossbow seemed perfectly suited to their mission. The problem was that SOE's own engineers had already been working on the silent killing problem, and they had reached a very different solution. Now, before we get into what replaced the crossbow, if you are finding this interesting, consider subscribing. We cover weapons like this every week, the strange ones, the secret ones, the ones that actually changed history. Takes a second, costs nothing. Right, back to why the crossbow failed. The fatal flaw in the crossbow concept emerged during field testing. Captain Homer Williams of the Alamo Scouts, an American Special Reconnaissance Unit operating in the Pacific Theater, evaluated the Little Joe under realistic conditions. His assessment, preserved in testing reports and later summarized in specialist literature, was devastating. The weapon was, in Williams's recorded words, powerful and accurate as advertised. It could absolutely put a bolt through a man at 30 yards. The problem was what happened next. A crossbow bolt, unlike a bullet to the head, did not guarantee instant incapacitation. Williams reported in his testing assessment that the weapon could allow the victim to, in his words, flop around like a chicken with its head cut off, and might have made a commotion. That assessment sealed the crossbow's fate. This was not merely an academic concern. Imagine the scenario these weapons were designed for. An SOE agent approaches a German checkpoint at night. 2 sentries are on duty. The agent needs to eliminate both silently before the resistance cell can move a downed airman through the area. He fires the crossbow at the first sentry. The bolt strikes perfectly, a lethal wound. But the German does not drop silently. Instead, he screams, thrashes, knocks over equipment. The second sentry turns, sees his comrade dying with a medieval projectile in his chest, and raises his rifle. The mission is compromised. The agent is killed or captured. The airman never makes it home. For assassination weapons, instant incapacitation was not a luxury. It was the entire point. A weapon that killed reliably but slowly was worse than useless. It actively endangered everyone involved in the operation. Williams concluded his assessment with a recommendation that suppressed pistols were more practical and efficient. Neither American nor British intelligence adopted the crossbows for standard operational use. The British solution to the silent killing problem had actually preceded the American crossbow program. In 1942, SOE Station 9 developed the well rod, a weapon so secret that its very existence remained classified for decades after the war. The name itself was a code designation derived from the facility where it was created, following the British convention of naming weapons after their development locations. The well rod looked nothing like a traditional pistol. When disassembled, it resembled a bicycle pump. This was deliberate. If a captured agent was searched, the components would not immediately reveal themselves as a weapon. The barrel section could pass for an innocent piece of equipment. Assembled, it was an ungainly tube about 12 inches long with a simple grip and trigger mechanism. No external hammer, no visible magazine. Nothing to identify it as a firearm to a casual observer. What made the well rod revolutionary was its suppression system. The barrel was surrounded by rubber wipes, discs that sealed around the bullet as it passed through, trapping the expanding gases that create a gunshot's distinctive sound. The weapon used a manually operated bolt action, eliminating the mechanical noise of a semi-automatic slide cycling. When fresh, these wipes reduced the well rod's noise to approximately 73 decibels, no louder than snapping fingers according to contemporary accounts. The weapon was most effective fired in direct contact with the target, pressing the muzzle against the victim's head or body, eliminating even that minimal sound. The well rod came in 2 variants. The Mark I fired 9mm parabellum ammunition, the standard German pistol round, allowing agents to resupply from captured enemy stores. The Mark II and IIA used 32 ACP, a smaller cartridge that was easier to suppress but still lethal at close range. Magazine capacity was 6 to 8 rounds depending on the variant. Critically, the well rod offered what the crossbow could not. A 9mm bullet to the head meant instant incapacitation. No thrashing, no screaming, no commotion. The target dropped, and the agent moved on. The suppressor wipes degraded after 10 to 15 shots, but for assassination work that was more than sufficient. Most missions required just 1 or 2 carefully placed rounds. Production figures reveal the contrast. Where the Americans built only a few dozen crossbow prototypes, British factories manufactured well rods in the low thousands. Exact production figures remain disputed in historical sources, with estimates ranging from under 3,000 to over 10,000 depending on which records are consulted. But the scale difference is unmistakable. These weapons actually entered service. They were actually used, and according to captured German documents, they actually had an effect on enemy morale. German military intelligence recovered well rods from resistance caches across occupied Europe. Otto Skorzeny SS Special Operations Groups were known to have carried captured examples, indicating German interest in replicating the technology. The weapon achieved exactly what its designers intended. It killed silently, and it killed instantly. The crossbow program left almost no trace in the historical record precisely because it never progressed beyond testing. Mark Murray Flutter, senior curator at the Royal Armouries, stated in 2020 that no account has been uncovered of their use. Researchers examining both American OSS and British SOE archives have found plenty of documentation about development and testing, but nothing confirming operational deployment. Dr. John Bruner's 1991 monograph on the OSS crossbows remains the definitive technical reference, and even that meticulous study found no evidence of combat use. This absence of evidence creates a historical puzzle. Did agents ever carry crossbows into the field? Were they held in reserve but never issued? Did missions occur that remained classified even 8 decades later? Or were the weapons simply abandoned after testing revealed their fundamental flaw? The secrecy surrounding wartime intelligence operations complicates any definitive answer. M.R.D. Foote, the official historian of SOE, noted that many of the organization's files had been destroyed after the war, some accidentally, some deliberately. Records that might have documented crossbow deployment, if any occurred, may simply no longer exist. The most honest assessment based on available evidence is that Little Joe and Big Joe were experimental weapons that never progressed beyond the prototype stage. The popular image of SOE assassins stalking German sentries with medieval crossbows appears to be myth rather than history. Only one Little Joe is known to survive in a public collection today. In 2005, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence discovered it in army storage and transferred it to the Royal Armouries in Leeds, where it remains on display. The weapon is catalogued with 5 original bolts. 2 Big Joe 5s are also believed to survive in private hands, though their locations are not publicly confirmed. Most other prototypes were scrapped or discarded as unnecessary after the war. A handful may exist in private collections, but the archival trail runs cold. What does the crossbow program tell us about wartime weapons development? Perhaps that desperation breeds creativity, but creativity alone does not win wars. The engineers who designed Little Joe and Big Joe were genuinely inventive. They took medieval technology and updated it with modern materials, rubber band propulsion, aluminium frames, precision-manufactured bolts. The weapons worked exactly as designed. They were accurate, powerful, and quiet. But warfare does not reward technical elegance, it rewards practical effectiveness, and the crossbow, for all its ingenuity, could not solve the fundamental problem of silent killing. A weapon that allows its victim time to raise an alarm is not a silent weapon, it is merely a quiet one. That distinction cost the crossbow program its future. British engineering solved the problem differently. The Wellrod was ugly, awkward, limited to just a few shots before its suppressors degraded. But it worked. It killed instantly and silently. It was concealable, deniable, and effective. When German guards across occupied Europe learned that resistance fighters carried weapons that could kill without sound, they were not imagining crossbow bolts. They were imagining the strange tube-shaped pistol that their intelligence services had recovered from captured supply caches. The crossbow program represents something valuable in military history, not a success story, but a reminder that even the cleverest solutions sometimes fail when they encounter reality. The Little Joe at the Royal Armouries is a monument to roads not taken, to problems that seemed solved until testing proved otherwise. It sits in its display case, bolts alongside, a weapon that never killed anyone but still tells us something important about how wars are actually fought. Medieval technology had a place in the workshop and in museum cases, but not in the field. It took brilliant engineers, expensive prototypes, and careful field testing to prove it. Sometimes the most important thing a weapon program produces is the knowledge that the weapon should never be produced at all. British intelligence learned that lesson. The crossbow stayed in storage, the well rod went to war. And German sentries across occupied Europe learned to fear a sound they could not hear,